Shalom, this is Sara Yoheved Rigler speaking to you from the old city of Yerushalayim. About less than 24 hours before Tisha B'Av is starting here in Israel. And so this is going to be a special Tisha B'Av and your marriage presentation. So I want to dedicate this class to the memory of Chaya Solomon, Chaya Bas Yosef, and for her Aliyat Neshama. She was one of the 3 members of her family who was murdered by a terrorist a week ago Shabbos here in the Israeli community of Halamish, in the heartland, the biblical heartland of the land of Israel, where she lived with her parents. She was a single woman who was a teacher, and just shortly before her murder by the terrorists, she had been honored as like Teacher of the Year in her school. She had been a teacher for many years, and I got something over I got an email that I just felt so strongly that I want to share with you, my Kesher wives, because Chaya Solomon really embodied everything that we idealize in the Kesher Wife Club. She used to write comments she was very, very connected to her students, and she would write comments on the report cards, personal comments. And this is something she wrote. She wrote it in Hebrew. This is an English translation. It just moved me tremendously, and I thought rather than a Kesher Wife of the Week this week when we're all in mourning for Tisha B'Av, oh, now what happened here? No, okay. I'm gonna read this. Where am I here? She wrote, when giving out report cards, I always remember another sort of report card similar to the one. Oh, I'm having trouble here with this thing again. Okay, here we go. Another sort of report card similar to the one given out at school. A report card which our Father in heaven, who dwells in every place, gives out. But instead of academics and test results, he distributes results for the following subjects: friendship, patience, understanding and love, a good heart, responsibility, recognizing the good in others, and humility. This report card is more important than any other report card, not once or twice a year, but every passing moment, because many times in the rush of life we forget to be a person with good midot, and that is the real test in life. She signed it with much success, Mora Chaya. So I felt this was more appropriate this week than a Kesher Wife of the Week, and gave me a really searing sense of who we lost. I had never heard of Chaya Solomon before her murder. I'm sure none of us have, but we get a sense from this, what she wrote on her student's report card, get a sense of what a great woman she was, and how profound is the loss of such a soul. I mean, a loss of any Jew in the hands of terrorists, any person in the hands of terrorists, is a terrible loss, but obviously Chaya Solomon was very, very special. Okay, so we're going on now to talk about Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the holiday of relationship, or really the holiday of failure of relationship. You know that the Beis HaMikdash was, both the first and the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed on Tisha B'Av. The very word Beis HaMikdash, which we translate as temple, Beis means house. The Beis HaMikdash was a house. We refer to the first temple as Bayit Rishon. The second temple is Bayit Sheni, the first house, the second house. In that sense, the Beis HaMikdash was a house, just like our house. Our house is a place where we live together with our spouse and our children. And Hashem chose to live, to descend in some form that we absolutely cannot fathom what it means for the infinite God to descend into a finite place. But he said when he commanded Moshe in the desert the people should build the tabernacle, he said, build me this tabernacle v'shakanti b'tocham, and I will dwell among you. So the house, both the first house and the second house, the first temple and the second temple, were a place where Hashem dwelled, like a house, with who's his spouse? Am Yisrael, the Jewish people. The Jewish people are often compared to like the spouse of Hashem. We know that at Mount Sinai on Shavuos is considered like the chuppah of Hashem with the Jewish people. And in the sense that it's a marriage, or was a marriage, we messed up the relationship very much. In the last decades of the Second Temple, we know the First Temple was plagued by murder, adultery, and idolatry. The Second Temple, people were good from people. They learned Torah, they kept the Torah, they didn't do those things, but the Second Temple was totally messed up, was destroyed. The edict of destruction, not because we were lacking in the vertical relationship with Hashem, but in the horizontal relationship with other people. And the temple was destroyed, and we were sent into this miserable exile from which we're still suffering, and it should be clear to all of us that every bit of ordeal and tragedy that we have suffered in the last 2,000 years, including the most recent one, this terrible terrorist murder a week ago, Shabbos night, it all comes from the edict of destruction and exile that Hashem issued at the end of the Second Temple period. Because it says, the sages say that in every generation the temple is not rebuilt, is as if it's destroyed in that generation. So in some sense, we are as guilty as the generation of the destruction. And what were they guilty of? Sinas chinam, causeless hatred. So say the sages in the Talmud. So we have to accept our guilt for our failure in our horizontal relationships. And we have to ask what we can do to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. Now, most of you have heard the statement, the temple was destroyed because of sinas chinam, causeless hatred. It will be rebuilt only by ahavas chinam, causeless love. So what is causeless love? Today we would use the term unconditional love. So Pirkei Avos gives a definition. It says, all love that depends on something, when that thing disappears, the love disappears. But that love that is not dependent on anything, it will never cease. So unconditional love is love that is not dependent on anything. Of course, we all know that Rabbi Akiva said that the mitzvah that is the foundational principle of the whole Torah is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You should love your neighbor as yourself. And this mitzvah has no footnotes. It's not, you should love your neighbor as long as your neighbor is a good person, as long as they act nicely, as long as they believe the right things and act the right way. It doesn't say that. It just says, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You should love your neighbor as yourself, not based on what's not there is very glaring. It means you love not based on what the person has done for you, or that the person is so lovable because they're so easy to get along with. Matter of fact, the Hasidic Rebbe of Avraham Yehoshua Heschel of Kapichinitz, now I can't pronounce it, Kapichinitz, said, the mitzvah to love your fellow does not mean to just love saintly people. Hashem commands us to love even people who are hard to love. And the author of Slobodka, coming from the Musar greats, said, just as you love yourself instinctively without looking for reasons, so you should love others without reasons. Now the great revelation is that the key to loving others unconditionally is this. Okay, you ready? It came to me on Shabbos, so I've never put it this way before to our Kesher Wife Club. But here it is. Your loving another person has less to do with who they are and everything to do with who you are. So if you're an angry person, you'll always find in the other person something to be angry about. And if you're a critical person, you'll find usually a lot in the other person to criticize. And if you're a judgmental person, you will see many reasons to judge the other person negatively. And if, on the other hand, you're a loving person, you'll find what to love in the other person, and you'll focus on that because of who you are, not because of who they are. It's a big mistake we make. It's perpetuated certainly by secular culture that you've got to, it all has to do with the other person. The other person has to be lovable. The other person has to look like this or act like this. But love is not a function of the other person. Your loving the other person has less to do with who they are and everything to do with who you are. And how do I know this? Because I know a lot about unconditional love, not because I've mastered it, I certainly haven't, but because I was the recipient of unconditional love from a very great tzedekis. Rebbetzin Chaya Sara Kramer, about whom I wrote the book Holy Woman. I don't know how many of you read the book Holy Woman. If you didn't read it, read it. I mean, it's a very, very good book. It's like all my books. It's a Musar Sefer. So I first met this great tzedekis, Rebbetzin Chaya Sara Kramer, in the summer of 1985. I was a very fresh Baal Tshuva, very fresh. I had been Shomer Shabbos for barely 2 months when I first met her. And I had spent the last 15 years, I came to Israel having lived for the previous 15 years in an ashram, doing things that would have made Rebbetzin Chaya Sara cringe. I mean, I was just so far when I met her from everything she was and everything that was important to her and everything she considered holy. But from our first meeting, she loved me. It had nothing to do with who I was. It had to do with who she was. She loved Jews. She loved all Jews. So she loved me. And she used to call me a tzedekis. Now, believe me, I was no tzedekis. I'm not a tzedekis today, and I certainly wasn't a tzedekis 32 years ago when I met her. And the years that I knew her, she passed away in 2005. So I knew her for 30 years. No, I knew her for 20 years. I knew her very closely for 20 years. And she would say about me, she would say to me, "You're a tzedekis," or she would say to her aide, last years of her life, she had like an attendant taking care of her. She would say to her attendant, she would say, referring to me, she would say, "She's a tzedekis." And on the one hand, it was like crazy, because I knew I was no tzedekis, and they knew I was no tzedekis. But on the other hand, you couldn't say that Rebbetzin Chaya Sara was a liar, because she wasn't a liar. The point is, what she saw had less to do with who I was and everything to do with who she was. Now, in the Kesher Wife Club, we know the teaching of the spiritual GPS. Spiritual GPS is that there are two worlds, the world of connection and the world of estrangement. And you can't be in both worlds at the same time. You're either in one world or the other. So when you're in the world of connection, you love. When you're in the world of estrangement, you're angry, you're resentful, you hate, you worry. That's who you are when you're in that world. Two different worlds, and they're accompanied by these different, very opposite qualities. So if you choose to be in the world of connection, you'll love. Now, someone might come along, could be your spouse, your teenage child, your mother-in-law, your neighbor, who will do and say something that will plunge you into the world of estrangement. And then you won't be loving to that person, because at that moment, because of what they did, as a reaction to what they did, you're in the world of estrangement. But it's always your choice. If you want to stew in that dirty swimming pool of the world of estrangement, you can stay there. Or you can go to the world of connection. And when you go to the world of connection, by definition, you love. By definition, you love. When you're in the world of connection, you love. You love your spouse. You love your children, even the children that are giving you a really hard time. You love your neighbor, even the neighbor who is really like, messing things up, making noise, whatever it is. When you're in the world of connection, you love. Because love has more to do with who you are than it has anything to do with the other person. Now, do I see somebody saying great book, or there's no questions on this very basic point? Let's see. Are there any questions on this basic point? Someone is saying thank you for sharing that. It was a beautiful note on the report card. Yes, thought it was so beautiful I had to share it with my Kesher wives. So this report card from Chaya Salomon, Hashem should avenge her blood. I heard something that made my blood turn cold. We know a family in America. We've known them for many years. The father's a rabbi. It's a great family. They have many children. They're all frum children. And there was one daughter. She was an older single girl, very pretty. And I couldn't imagine why she wasn't married. And I was doing the ladder for singles, and I'm still doing ladder for singles. It's a webinar like the Kesher Wife Club insofar as I teach tools, spiritual growth tools. But unlike the Kesher Wife Club, it doesn't go on and on and on and on. It's a 10-week course, and I'm starting it again in Elul. So if you have any single friends, sisters, daughters, you can look on my website for the ladder. Anyway, I was doing the ladder for singles, and this daughter, I'm going to call her Tirza, she wouldn't join. And I didn't understand why she wouldn't join. But recently she visited me here in Israel, and she was accompanied by a guy. Tirza is now in her 30s. And I got the picture that, well, she's not as frum as she used to be. And we were talking, and I said, your father's a real tzaddik. And she said, well, I realize now that he didn't love me. He loved my piety. She said I had an eating disorder, and I was married to my eating disorder. So I didn't want to get married because my eating disorder, she used those words, I was married to my eating disorder. That's why I didn't want to get married. That's why I didn't want to join the ladder. But I was very pious. And when I stopped being so pious, my father stopped loving me. That's what she said to me. Well, it's pretty clear that we've not succeeded in loving unconditionally everyone if we haven't succeeded in unconditionally loving our own children. And we are at a critical period in history. We're on the verge of the redemption. Hashem wants to send Mashiach. But he can't send Mashiach because we are not fulfilling this idea of Ahavas Chinam, unconditional love. Not at all. Someone's saying, can we please forward the report card to us in the email? Look, everything that you see on the screen, you get the recording the next day in your email, and you can watch it, and you can stop the recording on any screen, and you can take a screenshot with your computer. There's a way to do that. I don't know what it is, but a friend who does know how to do it will tell you how to take a screenshot of it, or you can just copy it down. Okay. Anyway, I want to offer a metaphor because we're in this situation here in Israel. I mean, some of you on the line live in Israel, and most of you don't. But I have to say, here in Israel, especially here in Jerusalem, especially here in the Old City, I'm the only member who lives inside the walls of the Old City. Tisha B'Av is always, the 9 days is always a difficult period. You can almost hear the flames crackling over from Har HaBayit. You can almost hear, the Romans, getting closer and closer. The atmosphere here is so charged during the 9 days. I mean, this is something that happens in the Old City. The atmosphere is so thick you can cut it with a knife. This year things are especially bad, not only because of the terrorist murder of the Salomon family, but because this whole thing with, the metal detectors in Har HaBayit and the Arabs threatening us, and we backed down. I'm not taking a position whether it was wrong or right to back down and remove the metal detectors, but of course the Arabs rioted anyway. It's certainly taking down the metal detectors was making a statement very clear to the whole world that Har HaBayit is not in our hands. The Temple Mount is not in our hands, despite the fact that Matagor said that in 1967, when we in fact did conquer Har HaBayit, but we gave it away right away to the Jordanian, the Waqf, the Muslim Authority. And Har HaBayit is not in our hands. And whether it should be in our hands or shouldn't be in our hands now, I'm not going to get into that. But it was just like right in our face during the 9 days that Har HaBayit is not ours. And we lost it in the year 70 CE. And since that time, we have not had it. And we have this remnant over here at the Kotel, which is just a remnant. It's not, you know, it really bothers me when people refer to the Kotel as our holiest place. It's not our holiest place. The Temple Mount is our holiest place. And the Arabs are up there playing soccer on the Har HaBayit. They bury dead bodies of their, you know, national heroes on Har HaBayit. It's an outrage. You know, Har HaBayit is not in our hands. And so we're at this point. Here we are, the day before Tisha B'Av starts tomorrow night. And we are very, very much in this state of divine absence and tragedy that has been caused by the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash and Hashem leaving our world in the way he was in our world when we had a Beit HaMikdash. And what does he want from us? He wants ahavas chinam. So I want to offer a metaphor. Imagine you have a 5-year-old child and you're out shopping and you see a really wonderful toy and you buy it and you come home and you discover that your child's room is a total mess. Now, here's your predicament. You really want to give her the toy, but you don't want to spoil her. After all, it's not her birthday, it's not a holiday, and it's a really big present. So you want her to earn it. And you tell her, if you clean up your room, I'll give you a really big reward. And she takes one look at this room and she says, no, it's too hard. So you say, okay, it's too big a job. Just clean up the puzzles and the Legos and I'll give you this big reward. And she says, no, I don't want to, it's too much. So you say, because you really want to give her the present, you say, okay, you don't have to clean up the puzzles, just clean up the Legos. And she shakes her head and says, it's too much work. So you say, look, you don't have to clean up all the Legos, just clean up the blue and green Legos and then I'll give you the reward. You keep lowering the ante because you really want her, you want to give her the reward. I think that's where we are today. Hashem wants to give us the redemption. Hashem wants to give us the redemption. All the signs are there. All the Gedolim say we are in the era of the footsteps of Mashiach. Nobody disputes it. All the signs that are laid out in the Gemara describing the generation before the coming of Mashiach, we have them all. Hashem wants to give it to us. But in order to give it to us, we have to love everyone. Because the temple was destroyed because of causeless hatred, and it'll only be rebuilt by causeless love. So Hashem says, okay, look, I see that you can't love everyone. You can't even love all 12 million Jews there are in the world. Okay, just love the people in your community, in your neighborhood. But we say, are you kidding? That's too much for us. You know, this person acts this way and that person says this stuff, and I can't love everybody in my community. Can't even love everybody in my immediate neighborhood. So Hashem says, okay, just love your whole family, your parents, your siblings, your spouse, and your children. And we say, I can't do that. I can't love my brother. He's terrible. Do you know how he rooked me out of my share of the inheritance? So Hashem says, okay, just love your spouse and your children. But even that is not easy. So many children today are off the derech, or they're into very bad things, or they're making bad choices. And what used to be easy, to love our own children, is in many cases a real challenge today. And to love our spouses, there's so many spouses who have ADHD or are undependable, or they're on a downhill slide religiously, or they're not interested in coming close to us. How can we love such spouses? I believe today, and this is just my theory, I do not have a source for it. I always tell you, everything I teach is Torah, but I tell you when I'm teaching you something that is not Torah, that I do not have a source for. I don't have a source for this, but this is my theory. That Hashem will be satisfied and will give us the redemption if we can just manage to unconditionally love our children and our spouse. Clearly, we can't love all 12 million Jews in the world. We can't do it. We're just like, it's too hard for us. And we can't even love our whole extended family. But if we can just love our spouse and our own children, I think Hashem would give us the redemption. I'm not saying, of course, that any of us are exempt from loving every Jew, because that's the mitzvah. That is the mitzvah. But Rav Avraham Yitzhak Cohen Cook taught something that I've shared with you before. I'm going to share it again because it's a very, very important concept. He says that love operates in concentric circles. So you first have to start from the middle. And you have to love yourself. If you do not love yourself, you cannot love anybody else. Now, this is very basic. That's why here in the Kesher Wave Club, we spent weeks on this whole series we had just a couple months ago on loving yourself. Because if you don't love yourself, you cannot love anyone else. And we've had our True Self-Esteem workshop, and we have our tools of doing Heshbon HaNefesh, where you validate yourself for 4 things every day, and you say, I did this, good for me. You've got to love yourself. I see we have some Kesher wives who the heart of their problem is not their husbands. The part of the problem is they don't love themselves. If you don't love yourself, you can't love your husband. You can't love your children. You can't love anybody. You've got to start by loving yourself. Then the next concentric circle is your spouse and your children. Just work on loving your spouse and your children. If you can do that, then you can go and love your extended family. It's harder. Your parents, your siblings, your cousins, your in-laws. That's the next step out. I remember years ago hearing a friend of my mother-in-law. She had a son who was, he was a universalist, and he believed in loving everyone. But he feuded with his father, and when his father died, he didn't come to his father's funeral. Don't tell me this guy loved everyone. Don't tell me he loved like the starving masses in Africa or Asia or anywhere in the inner city. Don't tell me that. He didn't come to his own father's funeral. If you don't love your own family, you don't love anybody. You're kidding yourself. It's hypocrisy. So then the next step, then the circles just get bigger. If you can love your spouse and your children, then you can love your extended family. Then you can love your friends. And then you can love the whole Jewish nation, the Jewish people. And then if you can really love all 12 million Jews in the world, try that one. If you can do that, then and only then you can really claim to love all humanity. And if you really can love all humanity, then you can love all sentient beings. Then you can love the whales. Then you can love the endangered species. But if you love the whales and you don't get along with your own extended family or with your friends or with your fellow Jews, whatever you're feeling for the whales is not love. Okay, this is a very basic teaching. Because, and we understand from the spiritual GPS, that midos don't split. The truth is, if you're in the Olam HaYedidut, if you're in the world of connection, then you love, and you do love more and more people. That goes out in concentric circles. But if you don't love your spouse, you won't love anyone else. Are there any questions about this very, very foundational concept? That love goes out in concentric circles. So someone's asking, are your spouse and children in the same circle, or are we meant to love spouse before children or children before spouse? We are meant to love spouse before children. I put them together in this circle because I didn't want how many circles could I make. But we are supposed to love spouse before children. You're the most important relationship in your life, and this is one of our Kesher Wife mottos. My marriage is the most important thing in my life. This is backed up by many sources. You know, there's a new book out. My friend Leah Richheimer brought out a book with Art Scroll just a few weeks ago called Marriage Secrets. So Leah is very into having everything very carefully sourced. And in this book, and I think we're going to do a series on some of her marriage secrets. A lot of the stuff she says is stuff that we've learned long ago in the Kesher Wife Club. But other stuff is the stuff we really could work on. There's a lot in there that we could work on. Anyway, but she gives sources for everything. So she tells how she went through such a trauma when somebody suggested to her that she should put her husband before her children. And she was like, this was news to her, and she was fighting the idea, and how could she do that, and da-da-da-da. And then, you know, she went to this rabbi who gave this source, and that rabbi who gave that source, and she has all the sources there. I don't have them on my fingertips, but the answer is a very, very clear answer, that spouse comes before children. So the same person's asking, it's easier to love my children. They're an extension of myself. That's right. Loving your spouse can be hard. Okay, so what? Loving yourself can be hard. So what? This is the order in which if you want to have genuine love, it has to be in this order. Hashem isn't there. We're talking about vertical relationship, we're talking about horizontal relationships, not vertical relationship. The Beit HaMikdash was not destroyed because of lack of love of God. It was destroyed because of lack of love of other human beings. Sentient beings are animals, yes. Okay, I'm going to go on. Somebody's saying, I see my husband shows love to my children who are an extension of himself, and he doesn't show love to me. So what? What does that have to do with anything? Your obligation to love your husband even more than you love your children has nothing to do with anything he's doing. What was the foundational principle that this whole class is based on? Your loving another person has less to do with who they are and everything to do with who you are. That's our foundational principle. This is the first time we've spoken about this in the Kesher Wife Club. So your loving your husband has less to do with who he is and how he treats the children, how he treats you, and everything to do with who you are. If you are a loving person, you will love your husband. You will find a way to love him unconditionally. And what we're going to do today is give some suggestions for how to love your husband unconditionally. So let's start with the definition. Here we go. Definition of unconditional love. I will love my spouse for who he or she is, regardless of what he or she does or doesn't do. That is our definition of unconditional love for our spouse. I mean, this is a marriage seminar, and so when we're talking about the failure of the horizontal relationship that destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, we have to start with our spouse, and for the reasons I just explained with this concentric circles. So when we say, I'll love my spouse for who he or she is, regardless of what he or she does or doesn't do, it means that you're wiping away all the complaints, all the things that push you away from loving your spouse, that he does this or that, or that he fails to do this or that. All this is not pertinent. Now today we're going to learn how to love your spouse with ahavas chinam, unconditional love. I'm going to give 4 suggestions. The first way is to increase love is to increase giving. We've heard this before. This is the famous teaching of Rav Eliyahu Dessler, the more you give, the more you love. One of our Kesher wives is a woman in her 60s who lives in Canada. It's a second marriage for both her and her spouse. And they both came into the marriage with their own children, their own bank accounts, and their own possessions. The spouse is a really great guy, and she's a really great woman. But she confessed to me in one of our phone calls that she really has no attachment, emotional attachment to her spouse. So I asked her, who does his laundry? She said he does his own laundry. He's very independent. He also makes his own breakfast and lunch. I told her I'm not surprised she has no emotional attachment to him. I told her to start doing his laundry. Because Rav Dessler says that the more you give, the more you love. Now, many wives reply to this teaching by saying, but I do give. I give all day long. So Rav Itamar Schwartz, and I've quoted this before too, but it's easy to forget it. He says that you have to look at yourself. When you do a hesed, are you conscious that you are doing this act of love in order to nurture the other person? Because what you put into the act is what the other person feels. So we all do the laundry and we shop and we cook and we do all kinds of things for our husbands. But if we don't have the conscious intention of nurturing him, then it's going to fall short. Rav Schwartz's definition of love is infusing what I'm doing with intentionality. Now we know about intentionality in terms of prayer. We know that prayers that are uttered without kavana, without conscious intention, they don't go up, right? They don't go up. You can just, zip through the prayers. You're saying them. They don't go up. They don't go to Hashem. They don't go to the throne of glory until that one day comes where you really have conscious intention when you say this particular prayer. Let's say you're benching. One day, instead of zipping through it, you really take time to focus on the words and really have conscious intention. And when that Birkas Hamazon, that benching, goes up, like Grace After Meals goes up, it carries with it all the others of all the last weeks and months or years that didn't have conscious intention, or they were just hovering midair. So that's how we're told it works. Rabbi Heller says, when you do a mitzvah, you create an angel. When you do a mitzvah without conscious intention, you create a crippled angel. So when you give to your spouse, are you thinking, I'm doing his laundry because I want to nurture him? Or are you thinking, I'm doing his laundry because that's my job, or that's the right thing to do, or he has his chores around the house and I have mine, or somebody has to do it, right? What is the conscious intention? Where is the intention to nurture? Do you go to work in the morning thinking, this is my way to nurture my family by earning money to pay for the things they need because I love them? Or do you just think, this is my job? The giving that creates love is conscious giving with the intention to nurture and create connection. I'm going to say that again because it's so important. The giving that creates love. Rav Dessler says, the more you give, the more you love. All of us women complain, I give and give and give and give, but I don't feel that it's increasing love. Sometimes we say this. And the answer is the giving that creates love is conscious giving with the intention to nurture and create connection. So Rav Itamar Schwartz recommends starting small, to do a small act of giving, such as pouring water for someone, with the conscious intention of nurturing that person. Or he recommends greeting your spouse with a smile as an act of nurturing. Now you may go to the door and greet your husband with a smile when he comes home, because that's what you were taught to do in the Kesher Wife Club. But it's very different if you go and greet him with a smile because you really want to uplift him and uplift his mood and convey how happy you are to see him and how much he means to you. See the difference? So this is our first way to love our spouse unconditionally, is by giving, and giving with the conscious intention of nurturing. Are there any questions about this first means of trying to acquire unconditional love in our hearts? Okay, I'm going to go on then to the second way. The second way to attain unconditional love of your spouse is applying to him what we learned in the True Self-Esteem workshop, which I hope all of you have by now seen. You get it, I think, when you join the Catch Your Wife Inner Circle, I believe you get the True Self-Esteem workshop. If not, ask Jewish workshops for it. And there we learned that your essential self is that you are an eternal, perfect soul who is beloved by Hashem. Your spouse's essential self is also an eternal, perfect soul who is beloved by Hashem. Now we said you're connected to Hashem like the ray of the sun is connected to the sun. The ray is not the sun. It's not as big as the sun. It's not as hot as the sun. The ray is not the sun, but it is nothing other than the sun. And the ray is always connected to the sun. And that is the definition of our connection to Hashem. And it also defines your spouse's connection to Hashem. Your spouse is inherently connected to Hashem, like the ray of the sun is connected to the sun. We also said that your soul is like a candle flame, ever perfect, and it's impossible to sully. Your spouse's soul is also like a candle flame, ever perfect and impossible to sully. When he commits sins or makes bad choices, let's say, he goes on bad places on the internet. When he does those things, he's putting a curtain around his soul. He can make so many bad choices that he has layer after layer of curtains around his soul so that his light is almost invisible. A person who's, let's say, connected to a person who's addicted to pornographic websites. They can make the light of their soul almost invisible. But the candle flame is still there, and it's still perfect. Your spouse's essential nature is that pure and perfect soul that is like a candle flame that can never be sullied. And just as you have to be patient with yourself, this is all stuff we learned in the True Self-Esteem workshop, just as you have to be patient with yourself, we learned you have to be patient with yourself, you have to be patient with your spouse. Your spouse, like you, is a work in progress. God isn't finished with him or her yet. Your spouse is an unfinished masterpiece. We have a Kesher wife who lives on the West Coast who got married for the first time at the age of 39 to a divorced man in his late 40s. When I first spoke to her, she had been married 10 months and she was miserable. She said her spouse was self-centered, did not relate to her at all, and was not interested in working on the marriage or going for therapy. Now, I'm really against divorce, especially if there are children. But in this case, there were no children. And the way she described her marriage, her spouse resisted any kind of growth or change. He had never dealt with the issues that ruined his first marriage. He neglected her. I'm like, what did she need it for? So I told her to give him an ultimatum. Either he goes for therapy or she wants a divorce. Right? If there were children, I absolutely would not have said that. But there were no children. They'd only been married 10 months, and she was miserable. So I said, give him an ultimatum, either therapy or divorce. Several months later, I saw her name on the roster of one of the one-on-one phone-ins I get a roster on the day that we have phone-ins. I get a roster of who's going to be calling in to me, who I'm going to be speaking to one-on-one that night. For me, it's night. For you in the Western Hemisphere, it's daytime. I saw her name several months later, and I was surprised. I thought she was already divorced, so what is she doing at the Kesher Wife Club? Well, guess what? She never gave him the ultimatum, but on his own, her spouse started going to therapy. This is what she told me in the conversation. And her husband told the therapist that he doesn't want to make the same mistakes in his second marriage that he did in his first marriage. And she told me he really likes going to therapy. He comes home each week with new insights about himself that he's eager to share with her. So what's going on here? You have to be patient. After 10 months of marriage, she was ready to give up on it. She was miserable. But a few months later, he was going to therapy. He was happy with new insights. He was trying to change. He was a different person. You have to give it time. Your spouse is an unfinished masterpiece. Be patient. To love your spouse unconditionally, you have to believe in his divine soul, like you believe in your own divine soul. And you have to believe that he's capable of growing and doing his tikkun. You have to believe in him. So that's the second means. The first part of unconditional love was to give with conscious intention. The second part is to know that just as you are this eternal, perfect soul beloved by Hashem, so is your husband or wife. If any of you, I think Jewish Workshop might be sending this out this week as I think they're going to give you a bonus of like a choice of 4 different things to listen to for Tisha B'Av. And so if this one is sent out, it might be sent out to everybody in the Jewish Workshops community. Anyway, the third step toward unconditional love is to expand your sense of self to include your spouse. I think, we all know this story. I've told it many times, and you've heard it everywhere else too, about Rav Aryeh Levin, the tzaddik of Jerusalem, who lived till about the 1980s. He took his wife to the doctor to treat her leg, and he said to the doctor, "Our leg hurts us." So Rav Zef Lev wrote, "Everyone possesses their ani." Ani means I, the essence of their being. As the Mishnah states in Pirkei Avos, "If I'm not for myself, who will be for me?" However, the definition of this selfhood can be expanded beyond the parameters of one's physical person. Many people feel that their spouses are part and parcel of themselves. Hence, one's concern for a spouse is included in the natural concern for self. The more one perfects himself, the more his concept of self encompasses. The truly great person feels that all of Klal Yisrael, indeed the entire world, is part of himself. That's someone who has really mastered all the concentric circles. But every time you go out one circle, you're enlarging yourself, you're expanding yourself. This means that if you make excuses for yourself, make excuses for your spouse. If you forgive yourself, forgive your spouse. If you sometimes indulge yourself, don't disdain your spouse when he sometimes indulges himself. If you sometimes get into bad moods, don't judge your spouse when he gets into a bad mood. Okay, let me check if there's any questions on this. Okay, so someone says, it's difficult, this is going back to number 1, it's difficult to keep giving and nurturing with kavanah when we aren't reciprocated with the same. Intellectually, we know how true this is, but how do we keep doing it without getting burned out? So this is a question that comes up a lot in our Kesher Wife Club. And we've talked about how you give without getting burned out. You have to chart and reward the body. You have to give yourself you have to give the body a reward for every spiritual victory. You have to take care of yourself in all the ways that we spent a long time on loving yourself just a couple months ago. You have to prioritize. You have to not, be in the stress zone. You want to be in the stretch zone, but not the stress zone. So if you're getting burned out because you're giving and giving and giving, even with kavanah, but you're angry and are resentful because your spouse is not giving back to you, then the problem here is not that your spouse isn't giving back to you. The spouse is that you're not giving to yourself. Among those you must give to yourself. Remember, again, I don't want to have trouble with this thing, with the PowerPoint, but to go back to the concentric circles. You know, the inside circle, the starting point is loving yourself. So someone's asking, I understand this Kesher wife who wants nurturing in return. Somehow nurturing oneself doesn't always give the same loving feeling of being nurtured by another. It's true we have expectations, and this is something that, what do we call it, Leah Richheimer deals with in this book. We all wives, we want our husbands to surprise us with flowers or chocolate or a gift, you know, and if we have to tell him, you know, this is what I want, and then he brings it to us, it doesn't feel as good as if he would just spontaneously do it. But the fact of the matter is that the wives who wait for months and years for the husband to come and give them that spontaneous gift end up being resentful. So we're going to deal with this. We are going to do a series. I'm going to commit to doing a series, believe me, on these issues. Okay, I don't want to get sidetracked on it now, but Leah Richheimer in the book definitely deals with this very, very common feeling that I want it to come from my husband. I don't want it to come from me. And if you don't want to wait for the series, go out and buy the book. It's called Marriage Secrets. There's a lot in the beginning of the book that you're going to get impatient with because she's talking to people that are so beneath the level of Kesher wives that, you know, like politically correct attitudes that, you know, we dropped long ago. But so just skip the parts that don't apply to you. There's a lot of great stuff in the book. Okay, someone's saying, it's so hard to give and I don't feel that I get what I want. Giving is a choice you make. Rav Dessler says that the giver-taker choice is the basic choice in the world. That all the good middos are based on giving, and all the bad middos are based on taking. So, is it easy to give? Not at all. And we've been through this also with, you know, Close Your Marriage Business, that which we did a long time ago, but we can do it again sometime. That according to Rav Dessler, this is from Miktab Me'Eliyahu, there are different levels of giving. The lowest level, of course, is the thief who gives and gets nothing in return. Excuse me. Who takes and gets nothing and gives nothing in return. The lowest level of giving is the thief who takes and gives nothing in return. But one level up from the thief is the shopkeeper who gives only for the sake of getting back. He's only giving merchandise because he wants to take money. And he does. He's not a thief. He doesn't want to steal, so he's giving you in return. But this is a very, very low level of giving, to give in order to get back in return. We don't want to have a shopkeeper marriage. We do not want to, you know, have the business of marriage. I give in order to get back. We want to stretch ourselves to the next level, which is I give. The next level up from the shopkeeper is I give not in order to get in return. I give just, all I want is thanks. I want to just hear a thank you or gratitude. And higher than that is I give, and I don't even need to hear a thank you. I just want to see the recipient of my giving is happy, which is a very, very high level. And then, of course, the highest level is Hashem's level, which he just gives. Now someone's saying, including my husband and my sense of self could sometimes feel like trying to digest food I'm allergic to. Your husband is very different than you. Just like food is very different than your body. Food is made up of whatever kinds of proteins and things it's made up of, and somehow it gets assimilated into your body. But to feel that Just like you might be allergic to certain foods and you just can't digest them. In the same way, how could you expand your sense of self to include your husband? It shows you exactly what Hashem wants you to be working on. We all know, we've been through this many times, we are here in this world to do a tikkun. And most of us are here in this world, the tikkun we're supposed to do very often includes our husband, whom we may have been with in a past Gilgul and messed up. And so now here we are again. And we might really be at loggerheads with each other. But this time we've got to get it right. This time we've got to do the tikkun. So what is it about your husband that turns you off, that makes you feel like you're allergic to him? What is it? And how can you heal this? Because this should be absolutely clear to everybody. If you cannot love your husband unconditionally, then you cannot love Am Yisrael. You cannot be a Ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You cannot fulfill what is the basic mitzvah of the Torah. And you can never bring the Geula Shlema, the redemption. Then it's hopeless. We're going to be in this miserable exile forever. So Hashem says, I'm not requiring you to love 12 million Jews. But if you can't love your own husband and children, then we're never going to get the redemption. Are you willing to resign yourself to living in this exile with all its tragedies and its holocaust and its miseries forever? And yes, it's in our hands. We can do this. Ladies, we can do this. And that's why you're in the Kesher Wife Club. So you learn ways to do it. Is it hard? Yes. Everything worthwhile is hard. There's nothing to do with anything. Rabbi Kellerman says, when people say to him, but it's hard, it's like, yeah. Like, what does that have to do with anything? So somebody's saying, from experience as a Kesher wife for over a year, I can tell you, I never get in return. But when I don't give, it's like Tisha B'Av here. And when I do give wholeheartedly, it's a Yom Tov here. Because giving is always good for us ladies. Giving is always good for us. I think there should be a comma there. Ladies. She's giving a message to all her sisters in the Kesher Wife Club. She's saying she never gets in return, but when she holds back from giving, it's like Tisha B'Av. Because she's in the world of estrangement, yick. And when she does give wholeheartedly, it's a Yom Tov. Because why? Because now she's in the world of connection. Giving is always good for us. Thank you very much for that comment. Oh, and she's using her name, Judith. Judith says more. Giving makes me feel good. Well, thank you, Judith. The reason giving makes you feel good is because it puts you in the world of connection. And when you're in the world of connection, you feel good. And again, I'm repeating again and again this insight that I had on Shabbos that is really the keynote of this whole webinar, which is that loving another person has less to do with the other person than it has to do with yourself. So it's like, well, my husband doesn't get back to me. Wait a second, you're loving him. Doesn't have to do with him, it has to do with you. Who are you? If you choose to be a giving, loving person, then you will love your husband. That's the whole key of what we're talking about today. Okay, that's all the comments. I'm going to go on. So there's a story I told you once before about Rav Aryeh Levin and Rav Baharan. Rav Baharan is a famous educator here in Israel, and he was a child in the school of Eitz Chaim, the yeshiva of Eitz Chaim here in Jerusalem, when Rav Aryeh Levin was the mashgiach, the spiritual supervisor of the school. And little Rav Baharan, he was under Rav then, this child, he loved chocolate pudding. And one day, They served chocolate pudding, and the boy ate his, and he went back for a second one. And the man supervising said to him, "You chutzpah, you already had one." And he slapped the boy across the face. And the boy was so embarrassed that he got angry, and he kicked the cart holding the chocolate puddings. And the cart turned over, and all the chocolate puddings fell to the floor. And everyone said to him, "You're going to get kicked out. This is so beyond the beyond. You're going to get kicked out." Well, the next day, sure enough, he was called in by the Mashgiach, Rav Aryeh Levin, to his little office, which was under the staircase in the old Eitz Chaim Yeshiva. And Rav Aryeh Levin said to him, "Is it true that you kicked over the whole cart of chocolate puddings?" And the boy said, "Yes." And Rav Aryeh said, "Will you ever do it again?" And the boy said, "No." Then Rav Aryeh went to his closet and he took out 2 chocolate puddings and he said, "I also love chocolate pudding." And they both sat there and ate their chocolate pudding. And many years later, Rav Baharan, the famous educator, said that this is when he decided he was going to become an educator. Rav Aryeh's example of being able to empathize with this naughty child. What he did was really wrong. It was wrong, it was bad. I don't know I doubt in those, we're talking decades ago, I doubt they had covers on the chocolate pudding like this little Dani chocolate pudding. Maybe there were no covers on, maybe they were just all in little plates and maybe they just all, were ruined. What he did was wrong. But Rav Aryeh was able to expand his sense of self to include this child who loved chocolate pudding because Rav Aryeh also loves chocolate pudding. So empathize with your spouse. I've told you this story before, but I keep coming back to it because it was a very pivotal lesson in my life. That years ago, right after the terrible scandal with Bernie Madoff, Bernie Madoff pulled off the world's largest Ponzi scheme. Millions of dollars he stole. And he left people without income, their life savings wiped out. Some people committed suicide. And he was such an obvious Jew. Bernie Madoff, he was on the board of directors or something of Yeshiva University. He was such an obvious Jew. It was such a Hil Hashem. And I was so indignant. How could a Jew be so horribly dishonest? So Rebbe Heller was, in those years, she was teaching in my house every week, and she was speaking about empathizing with other people. And I said that I simply could not empathize with this terrible man who had stolen all that money, this Bernie Madoff. Now, the truth is, I come from a very honest father and mother, and so I'm never even tempted to steal. I have a lot of Yetzer Hara, but stealing is not my Yetzer Hara. So there was no way I could empathize with this thief. And Rebbe Heller said to me, "Did you ever fail a big test?" And I answered, "Yes, sure." And she said, "Your tests are not his tests. But if you ever failed a big test, you can empathize with him." Your spouse's tests are not your tests. Your spouse may be lazy and you may be energetic. Your spouse may be emotionally cold and you're warm and loving. But if you've ever failed a test and you enlarge your sense of self to include your spouse, then you can empathize with his or her failures. And that question just rang in my soul till this day. Your tests are not his tests, but if you ever failed a big test, then you can empathize with him. That goes for your husband. And the symbol for that is chocolate pudding. Okay, let me see if there's any questions here. Okay, I got a wow from Shoshana. I don't know which story, the Aryeh Levin story or the Bernie Madoff story. Okay, going on. There's a fourth method for acquiring unconditional love. It's based on a line from Psalm 37. It says, "Ve'od ma'at ve'ein rasha, v'hiponanta al mekomo ve'einenu." A little bit more, and the rasha, the wicked person, is not there. And you shall contemplate his place, and he's not there. So Rabbi Nachman of Breslov says, famous teaching of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, this verse warns us to judge everyone on the side of merit. And even if you see that he is completely, this is a quote from Likutei Maharan, even if you see that he is completely a wicked person, even so you must search for and seek to find in him this ma'at tov, this little bit of good. That there is no completely wicked person. And that is, and then it says, a little bit more, the od ma'at means a little, there's always a little bit of good, even in the most wicked person. The hibonanta amakomo, and you contemplate his place, and he's not there. Because if you seek the little bit of good that's in him, what disappears? Of course, this psalm explicitly is kind of saying, like, wicked people, they get theirs and they vanish in the end. But Rabbi Nachman is taking it to a whole different level, saying, V'od ma'at v'ein rasha. You look for that little bit of good in him, and he's not a wicked person anymore. And then you look at his place, and the wicked person is not there anymore. And in his place is somebody who has this little bit of good, this kernel of good. So in terms of respecting your spouse, we've learned to look out a different window. And this is a similar tool. But to engender love, unconditional love, this tool is more powerful. Look at the ma'at tov, the little bit of good that your spouse definitely has, and you'll be able to love your spouse unconditionally. I was talking to one of our Kesher wives. She had told me in our first conversation that her spouse is a teacher in a Jewish school. And there were problems in their marriage and in their life. And then during this subsequent conversation, she was complaining about her spouse. And, he isn't this and he doesn't do that. So I said, we have to find something you can admire in your husband. Tell me more about him. So she said, well, he's a rabbi. I said, he's a rabbi? You never told me he's a rabbi. He said he's a teacher. A rabbi has smicha. That means he knows a tremendous amount of Torah. It means he was disciplined enough to sit and learn for years so he could pass his smicha exam. So this Kesher wife was looking at the little black spots on the canvas, and she was totally ignoring the big bright spot. Her husband had smicha. Like she never even thought it was worth mentioning. There's an interesting halacha. I really love this. It's found in Shemos in Exodus 22:30. It says, the meat that is killed in the field you will not eat, and to the dog you should throw it. The meat that's killed in the field, like a sheep gets killed, let's say, by a wolf or something, you're not allowed to eat that meat. So what should you do with it? You should throw it to the dog. So Tosafos Das Zakanim says, I love this, says the sheepdog was supposed to guard the sheep from the wolf. The dog was supposed to guard the sheep from the wolf, and the dog failed. The wolf got this particular sheep, and it's dead. So what should you do with the carcass? Do you give it as a reward to the sheepdog? It seems like, wait a second, he failed. He failed to protect the sheep. The sheep is dead, and now you're giving the carcass to the sheepdog who failed? And the answer is, instead of focusing on its failure, focus on all the times it did its job and reward it. There were many, many nights when the sheepdog did protect the sheep and the wolf didn't get any. So this time it failed. But focus on the times it did its job and give it the reward of the carcass. It's this idea of the ma'at. Look at the ma'at, and the rishis, the evil disappears. Let me see if there's any comments here. No. So Shoshana was talking about the Madoff story. Okay. Rav Aryeh Levin had not just love for every Jew, but he had passion. Passionate love for every Jew. He said that the real miracle of Hanukkah is that they took a little bit of oil that they had and they lit it. Even so, this is about the ma'at tov, the little bit of good. Even so, you should take the little that you have and light it with a passion. In terms of your husband, it means search out the ma'at tov in him and focus on the good you find in him and light it with a passion. So we started with Tisha B'Av, where the temple was destroyed because of passionate hatred that kindled a destroying fire. And we counterposed that to Hanukkah. The passionate faith in the little bit of oil created so much light. So we have 4 methods of loving our spouse unconditionally and 4 things that we can practice this week. Next week, we're going to have a Q&A. You can always send in your questions at any point. I take them first come, first serve. Next week is a Q&A. But we have 4 methods of trying to cultivate unconditional love for your spouse this week. One is giving with the intention to nurture. Every day, try to give to your spouse one time with the intention of nurturing him and connecting to him. Number 2, look deeply into your spouse until you can see his divine, ever-perfect soul. Number 3 is expand your sense of self to include your spouse. Next time he does something you don't like, say, I also, fill in the blank. I lose my temper sometimes, or I'm too lazy to do something, or I sometimes say something that I later regret, or I'm ashamed to admit I made a mistake. I do those things too. He's like me. My sense of self can expand to include him. And the 4th is focus on the ma'at tov. Choose one good thing about your spouse and spend a couple of minutes contemplating it with excitement and passion. Okay, so we have 1 minute for questions. Are there any questions on unconditional love as the antidote to Tisha B'Av and the only thing that will bring the redemption? May this be the last year we have to fast on Tisha B'Av. Someone says, what happens to unconditional love if you're upset with your spouse? I surely love my spouse all the time. I just don't feel it that much if I'm upset with him. So the times when you're upset with your spouse is those are the times Hashem is testing you. You have to work on yourself. You have to work. I got upset with my husband about something today. We don't have time for me to tell the whole story. But here I am. I've been married 30 years. I've been working on myself seriously since I was 20 years old, for 49 years. For almost 50 years, I had been working on myself. And here I was this afternoon, and I was upset with my husband about something, and I was just wrestling with myself. And I knew it was a test from Hashem, and I was wrestling. I was using our tools, our Kesher Wife tools, and I was really working. I was wrestling with myself. And this is what we're here in this world to do. I mean, the Vilna Gaon says we only come into this world to work on ourselves, to fix ourselves. So you never get to a point where, oh, I love my husband so much so that I can just sit back and relax. No, Hashem will always give you challenges and tests because that's the only way we grow. It doesn't mean you don't love him unconditionally. It means that life is full of challenges because that's the way Hashem set up Olam Hazeh, this world. Okay, and with that, our time is up, and you should all have an easy and meaningful fast, and we should all be able to feel like, I'm doing my small but significant part to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. Well, I told my husband yesterday he's faced with a very hard test in terms of somebody in his family, and I told him, Mamash, you're putting in stones in the Beis HaMikdash for the Bayit Shlishi. Every time we manage to love somebody who is difficult to love, we are putting stones, building blocks. We are building the Beis HaMikdash. Have an easy and meaningful fast, and talk to you a week from Tuesday.